Today on the Locked On Coyotes podcast, we ask a big question. We ask the question, what if? What if a certain thing in the Coyotes franchise went differently? We're going to have a series about this, but the first episode of this series, we ask, what if the Arizona Coyotes drafted Mitch Marner? That is on today's episode of Locked On Coyotes.
You're Locked On Coyotes, your daily podcast on the Arizona Coyotes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Robyn Leonio. That's Carl Pavlock right beside me. On today's episode of Locked On Coyotes, I want to thank everyone for making this show your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, which means we'll never, ever have a paywall for you to ever access our content. We got a great episode for you on today's episode. We asked the question, what if, on the beginning of a what if series of the podcast. Again, taking a look back at events in the Coyotes history and saying, what if things went differently? We're going to start today, Carl, by taking a look back to the 2015 NHL Entry Draft. Arizona Coyotes were put at the third overall pick. And with the third overall pick, in real time, they picked Dylan Strome. But we asked on this question, what if they picked Mitch Marner instead?
Yeah, pretty big difference in career paths for the two players. Mitch Marner has played 427 regular season games, has 138 goals, 317 assists, for 455 total points. Dylan Strome, 273 games, 67 goals, 103 assists, 170 points. Probably, I think the most important stat is Mitch Marner has twice exceeded 90 points in a season, including last year where he recorded 97 in 72 games. So he would have hit 100 if he had played probably one or two more games.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at if you look at the redrafts too, Mitch Marner easily would have hit 3. Because obviously McDavid was going to go 1 no matter what, and Eichel was going to go 2 no matter what, right?
Yeah. You have to remember, listeners at home, that the 2015 NHL Entry Draft, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but it was a completely different mindset amongst what kind of players should you draft. Mitch Marner was a bit smaller, a bit lighter. He's a wing. Dylan Strome, bigger center. Strome's currently listed at 6'3", 200 pounds. Marner, 6 foot, nothing, 172. I think he was 5'9" at the time he was drafted, 5'9", 5'10". So he grew a little bit, as you would expect. The Coyotes definitely drafted for position, I would say, more than the most talented player. They drafted size more than the most talented player. It was a bad draft. It didn't really affect Dylan Strome that well either. Something we've talked about on a couple episodes. I believe Dylan Strome going third overall is the worst thing that's ever happened.
I just don't. Yeah, I like Dylan Strome as a player, and I think he's good and everything like that. But I'm with you. I think having him drafted third overall was a huge detriment to his career because there was so much expectation set onto him. And I remember this because I remember going into the after he was no longer OHL eligible because he turned 20, so he couldn't go back to what team is. He was on the same team as the Erie Otters. That's what it was.
Erie Otters.
He couldn't go back to the Erie Otters, so he had a first year in Tucson, and everybody were going to these Tucson Roadrunners. I think that year, that year, his first the first Dylan Strome year was the year that Roadrunners had pretty consistently high attendance, because everybody wanted to watch Dylan Strome. Because again, he was one of the most anticipated prospects for a long time, and he was amazing in Tucson. He looked
Mm-hmm.
great, and again, the hype was still there. But every time he got called up, it just didn't fit well with the Coyote system.
Yeah. And I mean, like, he was eventually traded to the Chicago Blackhawks in exchange for Nick Schmaltz. We'll be talking about that because that's definitely something that would change with a different draft. But, that was 4 years ago. And just this current year is when he really seemed to hit his stride. 22 goals, 26 assists in 69 games. Nice. But that was probably like his best year. And I remember like the Chicago Blackhawks SB Nation site, like just a lot of back and forth, and they're like, because Chicago seemed like they were giving up on him like right away, and they're like, no, you should like let this guy play, like see what he can do. He's not that old. Like just because he's third overall, like people are like, he needs to be ready now. And if he's not, that means he's a bust. And it's like, no, it doesn't mean he's a bust. It means like he needs to
Yeah.
develop still.
I also think one of the biggest issues with Dylan Strome was because of his lack of experience, he was being placed as a fourth liner mostly, right? So
Yeah.
he was only getting like what 10 minutes a game, like 12 minutes a game, which is really low. Like how is he going to develop in any way if you're not giving him the minutes at the NHL level? Like you have
Yeah.
you draft like this guy was drafted third overall on again like you said, third overall wasn't a great position for him, but he was no matter what, he was still a lottery pick, like like a top 10 pick, no matter what. So like, it really, yeah. But go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say it's something that we're kind of seeing a little bit with Barrett Hayton now. Like the expectation is there, and people aren't changing the expectation because of the player. They are expecting the player to meet their expectation. Doesn't
Right.
matter whether or not the expectation is realistic or not. Doesn't matter if it's good for the long term. I think Dylan Strome is going to be a solid hockey player up until his 30s. Like I think we're just now seeing the start of him. And to me, like that's not a bust. It doesn't matter that he took so long to get there. He got there, and hopefully for his sake, and for ours, so we don't sound foolish in the next couple of years. Last year wasn't a fluke. I hope he continues to do well. I'm curious to see if that will be in Chicago or if that'll be with a different team. But hopefully he finds a spot with a team that trusts him and kind of puts him in a situation where he can win.
Yeah, and again, I've always liked him, right?
Yeah.
Like, I interviewed him his rookie year in Tucson, and a couple times, and it was he was a great guy. He definitely had that right mindset. Obviously, it was frustrating for him to get called up and then sent back down, and called up and sent back down, and called up and sent back down. Like we talked about Kyle Capobianco, who had that problem. Dylan Strome had even more problem with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, he seems to finally be finding his footing. Good for Strome. But I do think it's kind of like key, like for examining this what if situation. Like it's important to note that this is a player who is no longer with the Coyotes. He is still part of the Coyotes because he was used to acquire a player who is. But that's kind of a big thing. That would all change if the Coyotes had gone with Marner.
Absolutely. We're going to get to that more of that in just a moment. We're going to talk about more about, what if the Coyotes drafted Mitch Marner instead of Dylan Strome in just a moment. But first, we're going to have a quick word shared from Carl.
So, got a quick message from our friends at Built Bar. Do you love brownies? They're really good. They're chewy, they're chocolatey, they're delicious. What about caramel brownies with some of that swirl on top? Also really good. Love to have that extra taste in there. The chocolate and the caramel work really well together. What if you could have all that plus 17 grams of protein? In that case, that's really easy because caramel brownie bars are available at built.com, but you gotta act fast because they're a fan favorite and they may run out. Forget about dessert. These are better than dessert. They have a bunch of macros, only 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, like I said, and only 4 grams of sugar. Make your own brownies. You're pouring a cup of sugar in there. What I want you to do is go to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 so you can get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. With Built, tasty is the new healthy. So go to built.com and get your box of chocolate or caramel brownie bars now.
So now let's keep going on this what if episode. What if the Arizona Coyotes drafted Mitch Marner instead of Dylan Strome? Things would definitely be different for the Coyotes, Carl, because obviously there'd be a personnel difference, but let's talk about the personnel difference before we talk about how the Coyotes would look differently in terms of like seasons, because you mentioned it, because the trade that sent Dylan Strome over to Chicago is what brought Nick Schmaltz over to Arizona. And Nick
Yeah.
Schmaltz, we talked about, is a bright spot for the Coyotes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, it would be like, what if instead of Schmaltz, you had Keller and Marner, which would have been a very tiny line. Let's just acknowledge that. Absolutely would not have been put together under Tocchet.
Right.
Let's be real. That would not have happened.
No.
And I do think that Marner would not be as successful as he was because with Toronto, he is playing with Austin Matthews a lot.
Yes.
And when he's not, like John Tavares is on that team too. There's a lot of really good players on there that the Coyotes do not have. I don't think you get a 97-point season with Marner and Clayton Keller on the line.
No.
Probably like 80, maybe.
You would still get a really, really good years, like really good seasons out of Mitch Marner just by his sheer talent.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it has helped immensely that that he's been playing alongside one of the best American-born players to ever play the game.
Yeah, and I mean there was a contract issue with Marner previously. I'm kind of curious to see how that would have worked out under the Coyotes. He wouldn't have had like the 94-point season to kind of fall back on, so I don't know if he would have necessarily gone as hard as he did for the contract because he's getting paid money. But I also kind of wonder if he would have wanted to go to a team that could better utilize his talents because we'll talk about it. But Marner's a good player. He's not enough to turn around a team's fortunes.
But similarly, though, to kind of think about it, would he still have met more of the expectations than Strome did? Because Strome is a little bit like the way Strome was built. Again, he was only sort of third, fourth line, getting 10 minutes max. Would Marner have gotten any more? Would he have gotten that opportunity to develop more than Strome would have? Because I think that's the big question.
I mean, Rick Tocchet did put Clayton Keller and Nick Schmaltz on the fourth line. He played them the same amount of time, but he said it was the fourth line. So, I don't really know. Marner was able to make the jump a lot quicker than Strome was. So, I can see him kind of going in there. It's a tough call to make. It definitely is.
It definitely is because you have to it's because we're looking at completely different. We'd be looking at completely different versions of these players, right? Like Mitch Marner would definitely be a much different player as a Coyote, if he started his career with the Coyotes, and you kind of said it too, would he have been staying a Coyote in the first place too? Because the Coyotes still weren't the best team in the league. I mean, would they have been a better team with him? But yeah, they would have. Would they have been a Stanley Cup caliber team? Absolutely not. Um, that's
Yeah.
like maybe okay, maybe like, and this is 100% hypothetical. Maybe because at that point they were better, they were able to afford to bring, to buy a little bit more at deadlines and buy more free agents down the road. It's like, oh, we got more talent, come here, and maybe they like at this point they wouldn't have had to blow up the team like they are now. They'd
Yeah.
have to retool maybe, but not 100%.
I do kind of wonder if like the team would have gone out and gotten players like, Phil Kessel or Taylor Hall if they had a player like Marner, like that kind of foundation. Or do you acquire a player like Taylor Hall, sit him down next to Marner, have that be a line, Hall a little bit more defensive, Marner a little bit more offensive. It could have maybe worked, but the Coyotes definitely had a scoring issue that the team felt like it needed to be addressed by getting some free agent, or not even free agents, acquiring some players that didn't really help in the long run, probably hurt the team. And I'm not sure if they would have done that same way. I still think you would need players to support him though. So how are you going to get those
Yeah,
other than acquiring them?
it really would have gone down to the decisions that John Shaker would have made at the time, and would he have made the right decisions to complement Mitch Marner? That's the big question. If John Shaker was smart enough, had the the smarts to do like that, like we don't know that part, right? But you can think hypothetically. You can think, you know, maybe he'd be a little more optimistic because a prospect actually panned out. That there's a horizon ahead rather than let's just grab something and see if it sticks. Um,
I think the biggest piece though is going to be that top line center, and they're just not available. Like very rarely do you see a number one center moved in the NHL nowadays. So I think that his game would have been very hurt by that. Like what do you play? Keller, Dvorak, and Marner?
he was another hypothetical. Would the Coyotes have had enough of emergence with Mitch Marner in their system and Mitch Marner playing on in their top six, and find out a way to clear up some money to try to say, hey, here's a big free agency period, and I'm thinking back 2018, right?
Huh?
Now right when Marner's coming out of his ZLC and everything like that, so it's like, okay, so we can maybe figure out a deal with you. Is like, we figured out a deal with you, but what we're going to do is we're also going to bring in a superstar free agent. If you remember who the biggest person available in that year's free agency class, John Tavares.
Oh, okay. I was like, Steve Stamkos? Was that 2018?
No, maybe no, it wasn't. Um,
Either way, I don't think he made it to free agency. I think he signed with the Lightning before.
yeah,
No, absolutely not. The Coyotes would not have acquired Tavares
no,
because there was that picture of him as a kid in Maple Leafs pajamas. That was
yeah.
what it was all about. Plus, they still would have had Austin Matthews. So that's
would they have made the attempt?
sure, but attempting something and doing it are two different things. They would have maybe swung for the fences. I don't think it's going to happen. Even with a player like Marner, that's not a big enough draw. And it's not like he did great. If we're talking about the 2018 offseason, that year prior, 82 games, 22 goals, 47 assists, 69 points. Nice. Not a player that brings you John Tavares though.
Okay, that is absolutely fair. I mean, one that had to be asked though, because you had to think about you had to think of all the avenues of how things would have been different. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying and I'm not just saying putting these out just to be stupid. I'm just putting these out to be weird.
Yeah,
Right?
and just in general, a good player, having a Marner on your team now, that is going to attract free agents. I just like the timing wouldn't have worked. Like 2019 was really when he took off.
Yeah.
And again, like he had Matthews at that time. So I don't think he would have been a big enough draw. I think the Coyotes may have tried to do more if they had a prospect who hit, like you said, but it wouldn't do enough to the free agent market.
Absolutely. Another thing that I want to mention too is the in regards to personnel stuff. I mentioned the trade earlier. The trade that sent Dylan Strome over to the Blackhawks, um, and Nick Schmaltz over to Arizona. And one thing I almost forgot, because how would this be different? Like in how the Coyotes, personnel would be different, because if they didn't trade away Dylan Strome and Brendan Perlini,
Mm.
where would Brendan Perlini be in his career? Because he's kind of fallen off. We don't know where the hell he is. What kind of deal would have been made outside of that? Because he was probably going to be gone either way. Do you still trade him as a package somewhere or whatever? Like, what would have been his deal?
I mean, I think he still would have gotten moved. Brendan Perlini, for those who are interested, last played with the Edmonton Oilers, 23 games, 4 goals, 1 assist. Didn't play in the playoffs. I think he may have been released, or is he in? Spent some time in Bakersfield at Bakersfield Condors. I don't know. Perlini, he was wasn't he a Don Maloney pick? Yeah.
Yeah, he was.
So like there's no a GM doesn't really have that same loyalty to a player that they didn't draft. Perlini had speed, but not much else. So I think he probably would have gotten moved. Heck, they maybe would have given up on him earlier and gotten a little bit more for him. Like just because they were looking to like acquire pieces, and if you sell early, then maybe get a little bit more.
That is absolutely fair. Absolutely fair. And again, we're thinking of everything, right? We're thinking of absolutely everything that would have been different, because obviously there's a lot of things that could have been different, because personnel would have been different. The team decisions could have been slightly different. But at the end of the day, Carl, I think we'd be at a very similar position than we are now.
Yeah. One player is not enough to change like the destiny of an NHL team. Not since Wayne Gretzky. Like we're seeing it now with Connor McDavid, who is unquestionably one of the best hockey players in the world, if not the best. He had an outstanding postseason. Didn't help the Edmonton Oilers.
Actually, it would be a different thing that I mentioned. It's those bubble years, right? The bubble year, because remember the Coyotes were bubble 2018 and 2019 and 2020.
Yeah.
Right? They're both playoff teams, and technically they made it to the bubble in a different term, in a different terminology here, in 2020. But they were still on the cusp. They, just barely playoff teams. Even 2021, right before they decided to completely blow it up. But in those years, again, they were so freaking close. I think Marner would have been enough of a push to get them to the playoffs, but it wouldn't have been enough to get them past the first round. They would always be a first round exit. It would be a disappointment in that sense. Again, we wouldn't be like 31st to 32nd, but the Coyotes would still have decided to rebuild, because new ownership, new management, everything like that. It still would have happened.
Yeah, probably. But there is something to be said for a team that is like consistently good enough to make the playoffs. Like that was the Detroit Red Wings thing for what, 25 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like and they weren't always good. They like left the first round quite a bit. But like when you build up that kind of reputation as like, hey, you can at least make the postseason, like that maybe helps fans a little bit more. Like the Coyotes are a team that definitely relies on on ice success. They wouldn't have had the most success, but they would have had some. Could potentially, impact it. But I agree. I think that, the team was going to rebuild sooner or later. I don't think the players they had were necessarily going to be a big enough hit. Like I said, the number one center that the team was working with was Christian Dvorak, who didn't have the best year with Montreal, although definitely injuries played a part of that. So I don't know. He would also, assuming Mitch Marner's career takes a somewhat similar trajectory where he's like high offense. Like we said, probably not going to be in that 90 goal range or 90 point range, maybe like the 70. Like that's still a player who's going to get like a pretty massive return. He could have theoretically jump started the rebuild much more than anyone else on the team.
Yeah. That kind of reminded me of something when it came to the thing of the jump start in the rebuild. It made me think of Connor Garland for a minute. Then I thought of the moment, like, what if for a few games we had the opportunity to see Connor Garland and Mitch Marner together? Like, I'm just like,
that would be all right. Because I will say this. I was not the most impressed with Garland up until his last year with the Coyotes. Like I admired his tenacity, but I thought he didn't have a really complete game.
well, yeah,
A year,
it took him a while, but
yeah. That last year though he was with the Coyotes, that would have been fun to see him with Marner. I'm not sure if their play styles would have matched necessarily, because that's a very difficult thing to predict. But I think that would have been pretty fun.
like again, yeah, would it have matched? Maybe not. Would have been fun. Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And the good thing about Garland is he was a player who wasn't afraid to go to the front of the net. So he would have probably like gotten quite a few like deflection goals off Marner shots. And that would have been pretty good. I think theoretically they could have worked out well together. That would be definitely one of the more interesting ones. But like Garland jumpstarted the rebuild, getting traded to Vancouver for that Dylan Guenther pick, along with a bunch of other things, including Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Like I do think that probably the biggest impact, if the Coyotes had drafted Mitch Marner, was the rebuild that we're currently in would be slightly further along, which is kind of sad, but just kind of what it is.
What, like, instead they would have, like, they would have traded something for higher and would have gotten what, like a William Eklund instead of Dylan
Yeah,
Guenther or something like that.
yeah, or like, because I imagine if like you tried to trade Mitch Marner now, you'd get multiple first round picks.
Oh, absolutely.
You'd get prospect. You'd get the entire farm. And again, he would not have the same numbers, but I still think the Coyotes would get like a pretty good return for him.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, that's kind of roughly what I was saying about that. But again, it is really fun playing these what if things, and I think we can, because like with the Coyotes, you can do a whole series of what ifs, right? What if certain things went differently? Because let's just look in the last 10 years how differently things went, and again, we're gonna have a few episodes dedicated to that, and this was just the beginning.
Yeah, and it's definitely a fun one. What if the Coyotes had more offense? It'd be more fun to watch. I think, like at the end of the day, a team with Mitch Marner is more fun than a team without Mitch Marner.
Well, yeah, that's that's for darn sure. And I think we would have there would have been some a lot more butts and seats. The Hilo Arena would have been exciting.
Yeah.
But anyways, though, we're out of time on this episode of Locked On Coyotes. If you like what you heard, don't forget to leave a review, like, comment, subscribe if you have yet to already. We're available everywhere you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. Let us know if you like this What If series, and let us know if you have a suggestion for a What If series episode that we can talk to, and we will consider each one if we were able to put an episode out for those suggestions. Anyways, though, don't forget to interact with us on social media. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/LockedOnCoyotes, on Instagram at LockedOnCoyotes, and on Twitter at LO_Coyotes. I'm personally at Robyn_Leonio. Carl Pavlak is Carl Pavlak FFH. Interact with us, ask a question you might have. We can answer right back, or on a future episode of the Locked On Coyotes podcast. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to today's episode. And another reminder to you guys, we got a packed next couple of weeks for you guys. Lots of guests coming up, including Will Scout from Scouting for our prospect report later this week. You don't want to miss any of our podcast episodes coming up. Anyways, thanks again, everyone, for listening to today's episode. Hope you guys are staying safe out there. Hope you guys are staying healthy. And don't forget to howl on.